standing here, and what I've usually done for gas is I'm a glass blower. I blow glass. So when I blow glass, I'm always like this. now I have to face it. It's an entirely different thing. But I hope you had a great time at the gas conference and bear with me. So, thanks for coming today. I'm Boyd and this is Bill, and we're going to talk about the project that we I've been working on, the diagram. I currently maintain a studio with my wife Lisa Zerkowitz in Seattle, and I've been teaching glass blowing workshops professionally since 1997. I use the Tagline to create glass blowing tutorials, which include drawings, videos, and animations done by Bill. The project lives on a page on the Corning Museum of Glass's website. And during this talk, I was going to talk a little bit about how information was passed along at the time I started a long time ago, how this project was developed. Bill's going to talk a little bit of tech stuff with you. And then I'll briefly cover some of the programs used to put everything together. I started blowing glass in 1986 at Punahou High School. This is my first class teacher, Hugh Jenkins, and there was not nearly the amount of resources and educational material that there is today. There were sources, but you had to search for them. You couldn't go online, and there was no such thing as YouTube. So there were a few different paths that you could take to further your glass blowing education. You could have worked in a factory, you could have worked for a private studio, or you could have been an apprentice, do an apprenticeship of some sort. You could also have supplemented the hands-on with books and other printed material, which was also available. A favorite of mine was Walt Lieberman's Glass Guide. I got a copy of this when I was in school. It was never published, but it was passed along as copies. And one of the greatest quotes came out of this book, hot good, cold bad. You might have enrolled in a college with the glass program or attended a technical training school in order to pursue glass. I don't know if there was technical training schools in the States at that time, but I know you could have gone abroad to study. There were summer programs and organizations that had programming like the Penland School of Brass, Filtered Glass School, Haystack, and Aramon. I know there's much more than these, but these are the ones that were most familiar and the ones I heard about at the time. And there were organizations such as the Glass Art Society, which provided a community for the glass artists as well as professionals. Probably the most common transfer of information was word of mouth. Someone might have gone to this magical place called Pilchuck and brought back stories about how they would do things in the woods in Standard, Washington. You'd hear incredible stories about what Lino could do. But everyone's heard this joke, right? How many glass blowers does it take to screw in a light bulb? 100. One to screw it in, and 99 to tell you how Lino would have done it. So word of mouth was always entertaining. So how was this tag project developed? In 2002, I went to Esri Glass Studio in Fukui, Japan. This is Hiroshi Yamano's studio. I went there with Nadez Degenitez to co-teach a class with, and Roger Paramore was there as well, and Tessa Clegg, a chemicast from the UK. Here, as you might can't imagine, there's a communication barrier. There was a translator, but I used a lot of gestures, air drawings, and chalk drawings to teach. The next year, at the Pittsburgh Glass Center, I came a day early, and I started these simple linear drawings which indicated jack positions, showed different points of view, and highlighted what I thought was most important to focus on in the glass blowing process. These drawings would often indicate points of pressure and directional force being applied, things that you couldn't see when watching demonstrations. Along with the drawings I was working on, I passed out these handouts which supplemented the drawings, and these handouts covered things like tools, heating and gathering, building up heat, the working window, things like that. But around 2012, 2013, I stopped handing these out because I found that the drawings were a much more effective teaching tool. So wherever I went, I passed out the drawings and drew these sets of images over and over again. When I went to schools that had the dry erase board, it was great. I felt like I'm moving up in the world. Then I realized I didn't have to draw these over and over again. I went to RIT with Lisa in 2012, and took some newsprint and I made some larger drawings really quickly, and found I could just walk into the schools and pin them up. Also in 2012, I got a great hand-me-down. I got an iPad, my dad's old one. When he got a new one, I found this program called Autodesk by Graphic. It's a very basic, non-intimidating, vector-based program. And I think the program is around $9 still. I slowly started to translate these drawings into clean, linear drawings, and this changed everything. I could work, save, and rework the drawings very easily, and opened lots of doors. These minimal drawings highlight what I think are key points in the glassblowing process. And I also use this program to do much of the designs in our work. T-shirts too. Along with the drawings, I also discovered Keynote on the iPad and just started developing presentations that I incorporate into hotshot demonstrations when I go on the road. The beauty of the iPad was that it allowed me to do presentations in any situation I walked into. When, say, a projector wasn't available, I could just hold it up and start talking about stuff. Enter Bill. This is Bill. He was an engineer and worked and lived in Seattle when I first met him at the Fine Arts Center, which is a rental facility in Seattle, and had a residency at the Museum of Glass in Tacoma. And this fella came down, he sat in the front row, and he brought his sketchbook, and he came day after day, and we're like, who the heck is this guy? And then I met him, and we've been friends ever since. And so the past several years, when I've been going out to DC and teaching at this place called Glen Echo, Bill helps me out there. So one day I mentioned to him that it's been my dream to animate my two-dimensional drawings. I had a vision to make the lines move, and people had always told me I needed to use flash animation, and I said, no, you want to animate it in 3D. So I applied for the technology advancing glassware. To grant an artist or a group of artists to fund research into new materials, techniques, making methods, and applications of technology that will generally advance the field of art glass. And it's a grant specifically created to give back to the community. It's made possible through the generous support of Ted and Melissa Legree. So I submitted a proposal with Bill's Magic. It basically said I wanted to create some glassblowing tutorials that included animations of key parts of the process. The project is free for everyone to use. The opening of a bowl is shown here. And this was part of the proposal that I submitted. And it's gone through several variations. So over here, Bill first started out with a bowl that was closed and a bowl that's open. And he's going to talk about a program called Blender. And Blender took that closed form and open form and filled in the rest and basically made the bowl move. And then I said, well, I want to make it spin. I want to see it rotate, so it came up like this. And I said, well, it's really important to see where the tools are touching in the inside of the bowl. So he created this band over here. Got refined into points of contact, just very specific points where you can see where the tool is touching. You see rotation. I sent him cleaner, better drawings about the bowl, and we sort of finalized the shape like this. He also did some video overlays as well. With the grant, I purchased a camera, a computer, and a larger iPad. I'm using the iPad to do this talk right now. The camera could capture video footage in the shop, and the iPad could be taken on the road. So I got a bigger iPad so people didn't have to squint. I first started creating a library of tools utilizing this program called Fusion 360. These are all my tools and equipment, and everything was drawn to scale. Program's free. You could sign up for a license, hobbyist license, I think. I'm not quite sure. It's a hobbyist. And I'm sorry?
It's called
Enthusiast? Enthusiast. Oh, it's an enthusiast license. Thank you. So the project consists of 3 parts: a drawing, presentations that include clips with animation and video overlays, as well as full-length glass-blowing videos. So I'm going to talk a little bit now how Bill and I communicated. He'll give you the real tech talk about what he did, but I'm going to use a punny as an example of how we would talk remotely. I first started by creating a video clip. This is Lisa making a punty. Then we make a storyboard illustrating and talking about key points of the process. He made a checklist for the animation. This one actually is for the board, but he created this checklist so he wouldn't forget anything. Bill would send me a rough sketch of the animation. He would talk about the timing of the animation and the duration of the animation. We would talk about visual indicators illustrating pressures and angles. And after he sent me that, I would send him back some ideas, and Bill would refine the animation, and on it went. For this project, Bill used a free and open source program called Blender, and originally the idea was for Bill to teach me how to use Blender, and then I'd create the animations. But the first time I opened Blender, it was as if the screen blew up in my face. What I found was that you need a Blender PhD to understand all the keystroke combinations.
Oh my God.
It's ridiculous. Even with the cheat sheet, you need a reference sheet for the cheat sheet. So this was about the one piece that I made move in Blender, and it became painfully clear that I was going to have some problems, and so I left it up for the pro. So I'm going to let Bill talk now a little bit about Blender and the work that he's done. So here's Bill Malatesta.
Now we switch from Apple to C.
That is correct. Technology.
I was like the old Mac commercial. Your Mac, PC.
Okay, I apologize for sitting here, but there's a fair amount of video in the presentation, and it's kind of fussy to get the videos to play and that sort of thing. So I hope you can just bear with me a little bit. Is this working okay? No, it's not. You said all 3 work. Live. Is that working?
Oh, there we go.
I put together a short little playlist on YouTube so that if you actually want to see these videos in more detail, these are just the source, the reference material that I'm using as part of this. And after the fact, they're kind of long links, but if you just do a search on the GAS 2019 Technology in Glass, you'll come up with the YouTube playlist, and the actual instructional materials are at the Corning site, and if you search for Glass Education Sugiki, then that stuff will come up. And it's, I think you can find it fairly directly if you do that. Okay, so Blender was the choice to use here, and I should say that Boyd called me a pro. I am not a pro at this. I'm the equivalent of, in the old days when people used to send animations off, and folks that could color within the lines pretty well, could fill in screens. That's sort of what I've been doing. Boyd is creating all the content, and I'm really just helping with actually creating the animation piece of it. What I've used before is Blender and the other program that he mentioned, Fusion 360, because I'm an engineer and I do some 3D printing, and Fusion 360 is really good for things like any kind of hard geometric forms, parts that you might manufacture, that kind of thing. Blender is very good at more organic types of forms where you would do sculptural modeling, that sort of thing. And it is free, and that's in comparison to the most likely alternative would be the Maya program, but you can see that that's pretty expensive, and it's nice to have the ability to do all this kind of stuff and learn without having to pay for it along the way. It's open source, it's extensible, meaning that you can add capabilities to it, and the community is incredible. This is all being developed by people that, for the most part, don't get paid. I'm sure there's some paid staff, but to the greatest extent, folks are just contributing to this along the way. And it's an unbelievably capable program, but it's very complex because, like a lot of these programs, the commands aren't intuitive. Control-S isn't necessarily safe. It's that sort of thing where you just learn all these crazy commands, and it takes a while to get proficient enough to do what it is you're actually trying to do. There's a lot of YouTube that you can use as a reference, and it takes a while to even figure out what questions you want to ask. And then you discover a new term, and then you research that for a while, and you slowly build capabilities to be able to do the sorts of things. So I'm still learning this as well. I probably know how to use 10% of it. It's that complex, and I've been playing around with it for years. And there's crazy amounts of things you can do with it. It looks like this. This is the latest version. There is a new version that's been in the making for quite some time that's going to really improve the 2D animation capabilities. So everyone's looking forward to that. For this project, we use primarily two different types of animation. We use the 2D stuff where there's a video overlay, and we also did some 3D stuff, and you saw that with the bowls opening and so on. Some of the motivation for the 2D animation came from, as you can imagine, Boyd and Lisa travel quite a bit, and there was a particular video that I think they'd seen way too many times that Boyd, always thinking about blowing glass no matter what he's actually doing, saw this video and thought, hey, that would be really cool to do in the video. So I'm not going to play the full extent of the videos.
Hello.
Hola, konnichiwa.
Welcome aboard.
And thanks for flying with Delta. Muchas gracias por volar con Delta.
All coast priority on every flight. On every flight.
Safety.
So before we depart, we'll be giving a brief presentation.
Okay. Be sure all carry-on items are securely stowed in
Notice
the
the
airplane bin.
flashing
And
along the
place
edges
smaller
of
items
things.
under the seat in front of you.
They're highlighting
And ensure
different
all
parts.
aisles, exits, and bulkhead areas are clear.
If you're seat.
So Boyd really liked that, and he said, is there any way to do that sort of stuff? So we have kind of a toned down version of it that's become known as the Delta effect, because that's a Delta Airlines video. And then we tried to apply it to some things that were actually what we were ultimately trying to create. And this is the one that Boyd had showed you before. This is Lisa making a bunny. And just kind of a quick, rough markup of what do you want to be able to show where. We had a lot of discussions where Boyd would draw arrows and he would indicate things that had a particular meaning to me as an engineer that didn't necessarily mean the same thing to him. So we went back and forth a lot with me trying to use what I consider to be the proper terminology without really losing the point of what it was he was trying to convey. So I would draw some of these concepts in one way, and he would say, not really. So this. Turned into a little bit more polished version of it. And the final versions of these that Boyd has put on the Corning site also has a voice track that goes along with it. So we're not just relying on all the visual indicators. But I hope that when you see the visual indicators, it's fairly intuitive, that you understand what it is that's being emphasized in any particular place. One of the cool things about Blender is it has physics engines that do a lot of the rendering. And this particular image, Boyd saw this and said, that's not right. But sure enough, if you look at Punny, it actually magnifies the size of the pipe on the end. And it does appear to be larger than it does in the place where there isn't any glass. He still doesn't believe it. In order to do the 2D stuff, one of the cool features of Blender is everybody's probably seen either sports situations where athletes have markers on them to do kinematics of body motions and those kind of things. And the Tom Hanks movie, The Polar Express, where they put the markers all over his face and they use those to drive animations of different cartoonish sorts of characters. Blender can do that same video tracking. So in order to have the overlays follow the actual part of the underlying video that we ultimately wanted to put the animation over top of, I used some of that capability. And you typically have to go back over it and tweak things by hand at the end, but it does the vast majority of it for you. So this is just a little clip of how that actually works.
Tutorial. Step 1. Click the plus icon to tell Blender there is an object that needs to be tracked. You can track as many objects as you like, as long as each object has a minimum of 8 tracks. Step 2. Click the Add button and click on one of the tracker dots. Change the correlation 0.5 so that Blender doesn't just randomly lose track and start tracking. Almost any moving object that is a result of human motion are going to be a challenge for Blender to track. You are almost always going to have to track manually in almost all cases pertaining to human motion. Oh, and also, you can never have too many trackers because you simply have no idea which trackers are just going to completely fail on you. Editors, I literally have no idea how to explain this beyond what is already stated here. It's just common sense now. After you have done this, your object's position will be moved. That's fine. This is where you manually move it back into the cluster of trackers you have created. Manually rotate, position, and scale your object using the trackers in the viewport as a guide until you have achieved perfection. There you have it. A single frame of this sequence took 20 minutes to render. To render the entire 25 seconds of this sequence would have taken my laptop 8.3 days to render. Instead, what you're seeing here is rendered in real time using the amazing EV renderer. I'll be talking and teaching about the EV renderer in the time to come after other more immediate Blender.
So what you can take away from that is that spaceship was completely modeled with 3D software, and the motion was created by him moving the box. And the tracker was able to take those targets that he put on the box, and by combining them with the characteristics of the lens on the camera that he used, it created 3D motion of where those points are in space, which he could then link his 3D model that was generated within a program like Blender to that motion. So it moves it in three dimensions, even though it was originally two-dimensional. So it's just crazy, awesome technology that is out there. But you do notice that a lot of the contributors are from all over the world for how to use Blender. And sometimes the videos are easier or harder to follow what the folks are actually doing. So this is the basics of the process. And if you have any quick questions, that's like a yes/no answer, just shout it out. Otherwise, we'll have a little bit of time at the end, because if you have questions about some of this stuff, I'm going to try to move through it fairly quickly, and happy to answer questions later. And you'll have the video references as well. you start out by creating something that is the actual object that you're trying to put into some sort of an arrangement so that you can, create the overall animation. And these are typically meshes. Meshes are collections of points in space that are connected together, and they form the shell of an object. And then you take that shell of an object and you assign characteristics to it that represent how it might react with light, how it might react with other things in the environment. And light and material characteristics are more complicated than they seem on the surface. This is me creating a very quick template, just so you can see the modeling process, and it's very scaled down here. But it's just to give you the idea of the kind of things you can do in Blender to model objects. I described it as points in space, but you connect those points together to get edges, and then you fill in a boundary of edges to get a face.
So that you rounding the lip there?
Yeah. Just to make it look a little bit more like,
Yeah.
a tumbler. And now I'm going to round the bottom of it. So there you go. When you start trying to assign some of the properties to the material, one of the things that Blender allows you to do is to combine lots and lots of different characteristics. Materials aren't simple. They can be incredibly complicated. This is a fairly simple one that I created just to kind of look like an opaque glass. So you can see down the thing that's sort of salmon colored there in that box is a diffuse surface, meaning that the light that hits it gets spread out. And the other box that's kind of above it to the right that says transparent is just a transparent material. The box to the right of that mixes those things together in some proportion, and it gives you a combination that kind of looks like it's both transparent and diffuse. Boyd mentioned using Fusion 360, so it was really good to be able to model a lot of the tools that we would ultimately use in some of these animations from actual objects, and heated them so that they were one-to-one representations of real tools. Okay, so now you have a bunch of objects to create an animation. The next thing you want to do is put those objects together in some kind of a meaningful grouping and figure out how you want the viewer to see those different objects and how the camera and lighting and so on might move through that. And we went back and forth a lot to figure out how can Boyd convey to me what he wants to see. And we came across, this is a classic technique that folks use when they create animations. This one's really interesting, but again,
now,
for the sake of time,
we're going to explain to you exactly how we just create story. We usually start with a written word. I'll write something, and then once I think it's good enough, I ask for see if John likes it and approves it. Yeah, it's great! Approved! and he gives it to Joe, as you can see. And then what exactly do you do with it, Joe?
Well, I take the written word and I draw it into pictures. And then I take those pictures and I pin them to a board, a storyboard like this. And then after that's done, I pitch it to the directors.
Okay, now why exactly do you pitch it to the director?
Well, I want to give a sense of what this movie could be like. So it's like telling a story to your friends and try to bring it to life and get a feeling of what the story could be like as a final film.
Oh, so it's what it would feel like to be in the theater watching the movie.
Trying to convey that feeling to people.
So what are we going to see now?
Right now, you're going to see me pitching the Army Man sequence from the first Toy Story. And by the way, this was the very first sequence ever storyboarded on Toy Story 1.
Yeah, it was.
All the toys are worried, so Woody goes over to the Sarge and says, Sergeant, establish a recon post downstairs. Code red. You know what to do. Sergeant says, yes, sir! He hops off and goes down by the bikers.
Sorry to stop this because it's really entertaining, but you'll be able to see it. Sorry. once you have the storyboard, you can actually take your objects and begin creating this sequence of positions and so on that will represent the animation that you're trying to achieve. One of the great things about these sorts of programs is that in the old days of things like clay animation, you had to create the position for every single frame. Something that's really cool with the digital techniques is that you can choose particular frames that are important, kind of like those storyboard key shots that they put together, and then let the program interpolate between each of those all of the positions and the movements. So it really simplifies what you're trying to do. It's an iterative process where you would make those changes, maybe not like something and have to put a frame in between, but it's way faster than having to do every single one. This is an example of that. Apologize, this is not friendly. This is just a mock-up of a sphere with a dot on it. And I'll go through and I'll create some keyframes. Each of these keyframes is 10 frames apart, and then I'll let Blender go in and fill in the rest. If you look in the upper left there's a line of yellow dots that represent keyframes on all the different aspects of its position, rotation, scale, and so on. So I jumped ahead 10 frames, moved it a little bit, and you'll see another row of dots get created here in a second. So now there's another keyframe. I'll jump ahead a little bit for this. Because what's really important is to see the end result of the animation that it captured. So you can see those dots in space there. Those tiny little white dots. Those are previously captured positions. And now I just updated all the positions that have been captured, and you can see it's traced through space there. That's how it filled in between those ones that are numbered 11 and 21. Those are the keyframes I created, and all the rest Blender just filled in. Okay, well, even that's not as simple as it really is, because most objects move in much more complicated ways than that. They don't just jump from one spot to the next. The shape of the object, like in the case of making a bowl, changes. So there's a way to create something called rigging that simplifies the movement and allows you to mathematically constrain some of the movements. Uses something called shape keys. So even though the object itself isn't moving, its shape is changing. So there's another layer of how you actually create the animation. This is a rigged character. If you wanted to do more conventional animation where you had a character that was moving around, you can insert all these things like the bones and the controls that are sitting out front in order to pose it in particular ways.
And yes, I recently got a request to do a tutorial on the rig that I had set up in my walk cycle animation tutorial. So this is what the rig looks like, and let me just show you what it is capable of. So we just have a look over here. It's
So again, I'm going to cut this one short for the sake of time, but you can see the internals there that are driving the motion.
can be displayed even simpler. You see here, it's just very few bones that you actually work with. These bones here are IK bones, so you control.
So what does that have to do with the stuff that we're doing? I created these controls to control the wood jacks. So you can see that those blades move together, but I'm not actually moving them individually. I'm moving some of the rigging. And then I've mathematically constrained one blade to open as the mirror of the other blade. Okay, so now we have objects. We have them in space. We can move them through space. We want to make them look more realistic. We need to run the animation, the render engine that takes into account all the things that light can actually do, according to where you put cameras and so on. This is an image that, to me, would be enough to fool you and think, well, that's, it's a photograph. But it's not. It was created with Blender.
G'day and welcome to another Blender Guru tutorial. This time we are going to be making towels, because who doesn't want to know how to do that? So many applications. So this is the finished result, you can see right here obviously, and this is the unflattering image of what it looks like in Blender. So essentially what we're going to be using is the cloth simulator to generate.
So that's it right there. That's all I wanted you to see was the physics of how cloth would fall through the sky and be grabbed by a hook is something that's already modeled in Blender. Also, all the fuzz on those towels was a result of a particle engine. And how does that apply to us? One of the things that I can foresee in the future at some point, hopefully being able to do, is model how heat moves through the glass. So we can actually show you the effect of doing flashes, for example.
Is that stuff defined already? Or would you have to create?
Some of it's defined, but we have resources too for folks that could write the code to do it. And it's you can link your own scripting in Blender. Okay, so now we have the materials, we have the motions, and one of the last things we need to be able to do is to turn it from something that looks like this, which is a wireframe, into something that takes into account all of the different characteristics of how the light moves through the scenes. So this is just the rendering of a single frame. And depending on what the video rate that you try to create, that frame might be 1/60th of a second, 1/30th of a second, and so on. Which means that you have to do something to either make it into a video, or in our case, typically I will send Boyd a set of the entire collection of still frames so that he can assemble them. He can put pauses in there, he can add other markups and lots of things. And this is just a snapshot of one of the directories that we've used in the past, and you can see how much you're actually talking about for 10 seconds worth of animation. And I send it to Boyd, and then I get the bad news in the very kindest way possible. And then I try to fix the screw-ups and send it back. So thank you for listening, and thanks Boyd and Lisa. cast and Corning.
Thanks, Bill. When this project first started, I started a Google list, and this list was all the words and phrases that Bill said or wrote that I didn't understand. So it's massive and it's constantly growing. But now I'd like to talk a little bit about the process or order of operation that I went through to produce these videos, and to show you the applications that were used to create them, and hopefully maybe some of them will be useful to you. All the applications are free. I first create a basic layout in Keynote. I'd write down notes and slides in the bottom right, and I'd use them sort of as placeholders to be added later on. Think about what was most important to the segments that I wanted to show, and this would determine the camera angles that I chose. Created video with 1 or 2 cameras, and at first I used a GoPro and an SLR camera. The GoPro for close-ups and the SLR for wide angles. I thought both were very important to capture the video. The close-ups for the details, and the wide angles to show duration as well as the depth of healing in the glory hole. The close-ups are important, but the wide angle provides essential information that's often overlooked. Eventually found iPhone, iPad was a way to go. Everything was played really nicely together. I'd use iMovie to edit the videos into clips, incorporating the different angles. QuickTime or Voice Recorder Pro to record voiceover and insert them into the clips. Video overlays and animation were added and inserted into the clips using iMovie. This is what my screen often looked like. I'd have iMovie open on the left and Keynote open on the right. While editing clips, I'd write the script or voiceover in the note sections, and I'd insert the video into Keynote. Another example of a video clip on the left and the voiceover notes on the right. At this time, I would also add video indicators or overlays into the clips, and this was a really useful technique that I used. Bill used one way, but I used a slightly different way. They're done by creating a drawing or pointer on a graphic. Then I'd export them with a transparent background. The image would then be inserted into iMovie as a picture-in-picture. So basically, here's your video down here. This is the picture-in-picture. This shows the duration, and it's the floating arrow up there. So in order to make the indicators move, you have to make a set of keyframes, and that would define the movement of the indicators. And I'm not going to go into detail about that. If you want to just talk about that or any sort of tech stuff or more about the programs, just stop me in the comments and we'll have a chat. Another useful technique that I used was I utilized Keynote to create simple animations. I'd import images one by one and export them as a movie. You could also use iMovie to do this as well. And after all the video clips, indicators, voiceover notes, and animation were put into Keynote, the final presentation was exported in its final form, and that was a video. So what are our choices today, and how do we learn? There's YouTube, there's videos, there's apprenticeships, jobs, books, Instagram, Facebook, universities, tech schools, workshop programs, summer programs, and there's the Glass Art Society. And so you have a phenomenal amount of choices out there today. And where does this leave us, and where is it all going? I have no clue, but last month Lisa and I were at MIT. Hey, MIT out there. Nice job on the sentence last night. But anyways, we went there and we taught a workshop, and this fellow over here is named Mike Stern. And Mike Stern just got a grant from MIT to produce some educational glassblowing videos. So he invested in 4 or 5 cameras and this master controller. I don't know the name of the controller, but basically what it does, it's the brains, and it records and syncs everything, and it's really amazing. His idea is that during playback, the viewer can choose any point of view, and personally, I think that's key to capture the most important points of view. And having the ability to compare one image to another to get a better understanding of what's going on. So for example, I did a super simplified version using iMovie. On the left, I show a comparison. On the right, close-up and a wide angle. Seeing this simultaneously gives the viewer much more information at the same time. So I really can't wait to see where Michael's project is going. Last year I thought augmented reality, and then I saw Pilchuck come out with this. And it looks pretty amazing, so it's pretty excited. I still believe that there's so much to explore in 3D animation to reveal things that you could never have seen before. Corning Museum of Glass put this out. I saw this note from Rhode Island just on Instagram last month. I think they're just brilliant. Super simple illustrations and animations that clearly show what's happening inside and out. Since that trip to Japan in 2002, which really changed my life, I fully enjoyed teaching, meeting new people, sharing as well as learning from everyone that we've crossed paths with. Lisa Zerkowitz is the other part of this team, and together we teach, and both bring different perspectives to the students that we work with. In 2014, we went back to Israel. This time my iPad was filled with presentations, and I brought the drawings and posters. They even added to my drawings and translated some of them, and it was much easier to communicate the details. Since 2017, Bill and I have been working on these animations, and I believe with the addition of the animations included in the presentations, it'll provide an even clearer picture for the student. I'd like to thank the Corning Museum of Glass, Amy Schwartz, the director of the studio, for helping to get these online. The material is on the CMOG website, and at this point, there's presentations on building up heat, bowls, the putty, straightening, turning, tumblers. I hope to do cylinders. And I see this sort of project as an ongoing process, and I could update it at any time. So I hope we'll take a look. You can find it on CMOG's website. Just search for Education Sugiki, it pops up. Teaching has been an amazing experience. It allows me to work, come back 29 years later and work with my high school teacher, Hugh Jenkins. He encouraged and supported me, and over the years we've talked a lot about teaching. About this crazy process that, discovered that there's all sorts of need for all new types of educational materials. I think everyone learns and absorbs things in different ways, and it's become this giant puzzle which I'm constantly trying to figure out which approach is best to deliver material to each individual student so they can process it. The next student's going to be entirely different, and it's been a lot of fun. So teaching has been a great learning experience, and I think what I love most about it is being part of a great community. So thanks to the Glass Arts Society for serving. Bill for putting up with me. I agreed for funding this great grant, and I hope you had a great time. I hope you had a great time with the conference. So that's it.
Thanks, man.
So it's really hard to kind of get access to.
I've seen other videos like these before. My complaint with these is that they rescale the color coding constantly throughout. And to me, it would be much more informative to fix that scale, so that 900 is the same color all the way through, and 1500 is the same color all the way through.
I agree. Yeah, you could. The thing is, you can adjust it any way you want. And that's
Exactly,
part
exactly.
about
But
it. Totally agree.
for me, I want to know that when I'm seeing purple, that's that color, or that's that temperature.
I think it would be great too. That's a great.
It's still a cool video.
Oh, it's very
You
cool.
can see that like the surface is colder than what you have built up. That's wild.
Well, have you thought about partnering with like a larger university like RIT or OSU that have both of those departments that might have all that equipment? Like glass and the.
I've been given MIT headaches for a little while.
No, or yeah, MIT that has the technology
When they get
and
sick,
the glass
when they get sick,
department.
they don't want to go.
Yeah.
I don't drink like that. I did that on purpose.